Good evening, Poe fans. Jeannie and I are back. We are the
Hotel.
Potastic
Ew.
Two.
Yeah, see, we're not in line there.
Yes, we were better than we have been. Normally, we're in the same room, and I think it goes better when we are. So, we have a very special guest this evening, and it is Dr. Sharon Pajka. And so, Sharon, we would love to hear about you and what you do.
Sure. I'm a professor of English at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., and we are a small liberal arts college university, and I teach undergrads. So I'm also the coordinator for English majors, minors, and writing minors. So all things English, but because we're small, I get to do some fun courses in the general education program, so general studies, and I teach this semester. I'm doing ghost stories and haunted history. I love folklore. And I'm also teaching media literacy, which I actually really enjoy, but it doesn't sound very sexy. So
Well, I think it needs to be taught, if you want my opinion about it, because media can encompass a lot more things than most people think about. And
mhm.
knowing how to use them and how to interpret things is
Absolutely.
needed in today's world, in my opinion. So, yay.
Absolutely. And the ghost stories, actually, it's always a trick into history because we talk about the fringe history, the things that we don't want to necessarily talk about in polite conversation or in our, K through 12 schools. We
Mhm.
get to talk about it with ghosts, and it's sort of a safe way to approach that topic. And also, the art of storytelling. So many young people today don't have, like, I grew up with like the campfire and the spooky ghost stories. And I want to encourage young people to do that too. So sometimes it's their first time telling a ghost story.
Oh,
And that's
that's
very
really cool.
interesting because I actually have a master's degree in reading and storytelling from East Tennessee State University. So not a lot of people know that there are actually, I'm assuming the program is still there because it's under the English program, the liberal arts.
Mhm.
So you can get a degree in storytelling, but a lot of people don't know that anymore because they don't use storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Kids can't even communicate without using text messages. So we
exactly.
won't go into that. But anyway, so great. That sounds exciting. I'm happy to hear
Yes.
that. I would
And
love to take
so,
the courses.
um, we also would like to hear more about the book you wrote that, let's see, what date was it being like coming out
It's
officially?
August 21st.
Okay. Yes.
So
And
2 weeks.
yes, it's the souls close to Edgar Allan Poe, graves of his family, friends, and foes. And it's with the History Press. Um, it's basically telling Poe's biography, but through other people. Um, and I'm sure I'll talk about too is that I was, as an English person, I grew up in outside of the Richmond area, so I've had a great connection to the Poe Museum in Richmond. I can't remember when I started visiting there, but it was before high school. And, even undergrad, I volunteered and I've had a long relationship with them. So I was really fortunate because Poe was, in my town,
Mhm.
and people knew of him. But also, I had, parents who were very encouraging. My dad was, he's 85 now, and he was of the generation of science fiction. So he loved all the spooky, weird stuff. And I think that was one of the reasons too that he really, it was like a gateway. Poe, gets you into the spooky stuff, and then you like reading the wide variety of things he has to offer.
Absolutely. And so with your book, because Jeannie and I both have read it and loved it, absolutely
Oh,
loved it. And we
thank
were
you.
talking about it a lot this afternoon, before jumping on Zoom, and just the format of how you took the book and everything. Just loved it. One of the things we were curious to know was, thinking about just all of the cemeteries, the burying grounds that you visited. have like you studied and done a lot of research on just like reading gravestones and things like that?
Well, not so much that reading gravestones, and really that I think you could build an entire career just doing that. I
Yes.
am part of the Association for Gravestone Studies, and we actually just set up, a friend of mine and we just set up a Virginia chapter. So we're starting that. We're definitely affiliated. And they're very much into the material grave marker.
Hmm.
Kind of like I've always been like about the story. So even like an epitaph, if it's something that to me feels a little bit poignant. And one of the things that I actually teach is like how to read different grave markers in my ghost stories class. One of the things is cemeteries, and there's different ways to read an epitaph, and we're often very wrong, because what I think might be poignant might be funny to someone else. And we don't always know like the full uh, story behind it. But I do
Hmm.
have a literature professor, but I did go back to school for a graduate program in public history, and
Okay.
they allowed me to do everything that was focused on historic cemeteries.
Oh,
Which,
that is fantastic.
yeah, I was really lucky. So um yeah.
That's really cool. I have just taken like one course, and it was through Atlas Obscura on reading gravestones,
Oh yeah.
and I found it fascinating. And just my husband and I like to go wherever we're traveling, going to a cemetery, may not even have a famous person, but just walking around and kind of wondering what are the stories behind these people. So
Mhm.
we just thought that was a just kind of an interest. We wanted to find out what, if that played a part in it or not.
A little bit. I will say that, so much of it is also reading the landscape, what
Hmm.
cemeteries, what time period. And when I teach a summer class some years about cemeteries in Washington, D.C., and we go to different cemeteries. And, some of the students have never been in a cemetery other than maybe a funeral. So
Hmm.
I do have to teach them, oh no, you can walk in the grass, because they didn't have these little pathways when this was established. They
Hmm.
want you to walk through, and all
Yeah.
of these concerns about, how do you behave? And I failed as an instructor the first time I taught the course, because I told them everything not to do, and I forgot to tell them what to do. So here I am, like peeping in mausoleum windows, looking for stained glass. And they're like, Dr. Pajka, what are you doing? Are we supposed to be doing that? And I was just thinking, oh my goodness, they really don't know. But
Hmm.
I grew up with a genealogist grandfather. So,
Wow. Yeah.
like as a little, I was like running through the cemetery, trying to find relatives and
Oh, that's neat.
Well,
Very
and back
cool.
in my neck of the woods, literally neck of the woods, because I'm a mountain girl, we would find these tombstones in these graveyards that were just family, but they weren't marked. There's no,
yeah.
there was no guidance. There was just broken tombstones with dates on them and stuff, because as you said, the older areas, especially in certain rural areas, you don't have a set cemetery.
Right.
It's just basically the backyard or wherever the person died, that they just buried them and may have put up a marker.
Yeah.
So yeah, and my friends and I, we're all history people. Well, all but one. She calls it our trips to the grassy knoll, which we keep telling her it's not a grassy knoll. Because we would love we are like pre, like from American Revolution all the way to the First Great War. So we
Mhm.
visit the Civil War battlefields, especially around here in the South. And the
Yeah.
one thing that we like to do is also visit the adjacent graveyards or
Mhm.
tomb, areas. There was one that we went to in Chattanooga, and it's a national congressional, and we were like, oh my goodness, what are all those symbols on the tombstones? We knew that they were religious symbols, that people were buried, the soldiers who were buried, whether male or female, because they were mixed together. And we were like, oh well, what does that one mean? Because it turned out to be like a scavenger hunt trying to figure out, well, what does that one mean? What affiliation was that one? we even found one that was Episcopalian, not no, I'm sorry, not Episcopalian, but Wiccan.
Oh,
There was
okay.
actually a Wiccan,
Interesting.
and there were even Native American symbols on
Mhm.
there, and some of them we're going, that looks like a what's that thing on the Big Bang Theory at the very beginning? Oh yeah, the atom.
Right.
Adam, what religion is that representing? And it was Scientology.
Yeah.
So for science, not specifically Scientology. But those areas, which leads into one of the things that I was interested in about, do you do rubbings on the gravestones? Are you like, do you like to do that too? Or is that just something not?
Well, so I think as a official chapter chair for AGS, I'm supposed to say, use that with caution. These are older than your grandparents. So
Mhm.
I actually try not to touch grave markers
Yeah.
in general,
Mhm.
unless I'm, cleaning something off. And I have cleaned them under supervision because I'm still very anxious about, this is somebody's relative, somebody that was loved. And they're already so abused by nature. I mean,
Yes. Oh,
trees are not forgiving, they'll come right down on a grave marker. So, I'm just very cautious about that. I will oftentimes, if it's a flat, marker on the ground, I
mhm.
will move, dirt and, I'll try to get the name to be, to show. But usually I don't touch them. And I don't think I would rub, partly because one, as you can kind of see, I already have a lot of artwork in my house.
Mhm.
Two, I think that it would just be a big mess, like to carry it through the cemetery. But I also will do a shout out to Gravestone Girls because I'm wearing a necklace and
Oh, cool.
they create rubbings. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but artists that,
Mhm.
yeah, like they recreate it so then you can actually keep it. And I love her stuff because then I can have it hanging in the house. And I
Yeah.
just feel like with the chalk and stuff like that. I mean, I wasn't an art student. I can hardly draw a doodle in my book. I mean, that's
I mean, it is one of those things. It can
Yeah.
be necessary. Now, I have friends who are artists
Mhm.
and who have ventured in that area and use them as part of their greater artwork.
yeah.
Especially when we went to Salem, like the Salem,
Oh,
because it's really old.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
you've if you've been there, you've seen them.
Yeah.
So, but
My mom and I accidentally went. This is my ridiculous story. So it was 2000. I was teaching outside of Boston in Framingham, Massachusetts.
Mhm.
And my mom came up from Virginia and I was like, let's go to Salem. That will be fun. Nobody does that on Halloween Day. And we had no idea. I mean, this was pre-social media.
oh
Um,
yeah,
so we drove into Salem and there was chaos then. And I've seen pictures now, which,
oh yeah.
20 some years ago, much different. But,
Yeah.
we were able to go through the tours and it snowed. It's on the water. There were flowers. It was like the most magical place ever. So
Wow.
yeah.
It's beautiful country up
It
there.
is.
Mhm.
Oh, it is absolutely gorgeous.
But I will say, like, of art, I do take pictures a great
Mhm.
deal. So all the pictures in the book, other than the historic, photos,
Mhm.
or, portraits are mine. So that's probably as creative as I get when it comes to artistic. Um, I admire them, but I don't know anything about, what materials to use and whatnot. So
Okay.
That actually leads into one of the questions that I had put on here about the pictures in the book. Are because you shared us the PDF file, which by the way, thank you. It was
Yes,
very
thank you very much for that.
so in the actual production, are they all black and white or they
Mhm.
actually color?
So
did
what
you
you
just take
what
them
you
black and
have,
white?
yeah, for the history press, what you have is actually what you can see in the book. So
Mhm.
they are black and white images, except for the front, which really looks quite black and white.
Mhm.
If I can take it down. So they just made it darker, but on the
Yeah.
back, like I took that picture. I'm so jazzed about that.
Nice.
It
This
looks
is the
good.
Poe Museum, the bust at the Poe Museum in
Yes, yes,
Richmond.
yes,
And
yes, yes.
you can almost see like where somebody had kissed him, and
Oh,
then
yes.
they have to clean off, the staff has to clean off the statue. They
Mhm.
encourage people not to do that, but
Yeah, they keep doing it.
yes, they keep you can see a little bit of rouge on Poe's cheek, and
Yeah,
yeah.
It
yeah.
definitely has the vibe of the portrait of Dorian Gray when you showed it, and I was like, oh, that's so cool, because it has that ghost-like quality of
Mhm.
he's still immortalized in
Yeah.
that picture,
Yeah.
no matter whether
Yeah.
he's still here or not.
Right.
Jeannie and I were talking about the pictures because they are beautiful, and I really like the aspect of them being black and white because it lends to that old world and just that historical representation. So that just beautiful.
I will
Yeah.
say that so Reverend Converse,
Mm-hmm.
his grave marker, which there's a lot of green, like it's black and
Okay.
white in the book, but there was a lot of green in that photo.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, that was the hardest, probably because it was the furthest away. So this
Okay.
was in Louisville, Kentucky. So that wasn't like a trip that I could go next weekend and take another picture if it didn't work out. So I
Mm-hmm.
think I took maybe 3 dozen pictures over the course of 3 or 4 days that I was staying there, which
Mm-hmm.
was all for Cave Hill. Like that was my vacation.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and it was totally worth it too. It was what a beautiful cemetery. But the first day I got out of the car and I took a picture of Reverend Converse's grave, and for me, like what was so amazing was that it was much bigger than I thought. So I try to describe them because some of these are like huge and some of them are quite small, but his was so shiny, the granite kept reflecting. And I was one of those people like, this is my vacation, please, overcast, I need to take a picture.
Yes.
And I continually had like reflections, or somebody would park and you could see a car,
Wow.
like almost mirrored in the grave marker. So
Okay.
it was definitely a challenge, but also fun because it was a great deal of, it looks like it's going to rain. Let me run across the cemetery that I think it's almost a mile across, like maybe a little bit under that. It's a huge cemetery.
Oh, wow.
And it was, where I was on one side and he was on the other. And I was like, let me just jet over there and take a picture. Oh, look, the sun came out. Thank you.
Oh, let's get a little brighter here. Somebody apparently is keeping that grave marker really clean.
Yes.
Tiny still.
I think it's just where it's located too, and the
Yeah.
material. It looks
Mhm.
like some sort of granite. I'm not an expert on identifying all the stones, but
Yeah.
it was lovely and completely clear to read, no damage. And probably someone that had a little bit more money, like probably his family members, chipped in
Mhm.
at the end of that. So
Yeah, they could buy the higher end kinds.
right. So
Well, and I was gonna say, kind of like you mentioned the challenge, especially with having that reflective imagery and things. So, like going to the cemeteries, you mentioned that you had to make appointments for some and some that are open. And so, did those kind of challenges, being able to go to those cemeteries, did that kind of push you in one direction or another of who you chose to be in the book?
I do, and I'm actually pulling up. I want to get the cemetery's name right.
Oh, yeah.
But I did, so all of them in the book, anyone can go and access.
Okay.
Greenmount Cemetery out of Baltimore is the only one that you kind of have to call to get in because they're gated. But
Okay.
if you pull up, they open the gates, and they have maps right there. So they're open to tourism. It's just where they're located and probably how to get in there with a car. You just have
Okay.
to call a number, or you can get out of your car and push a button, and it
Mhm.
rings for the office staff because their office is right there.
Okay.
But I was thinking about one cemetery in Baltimore, and I want to say Saint. Nah, I don't want to get it wrong. But let me.
Oh yeah, take your time while you're looking it up. That's all good.
Yeah, let me just browse because I'm pretty good at spotting who I need to look at. And I mentioned that he's not in the book. So if you looked at the very end, Elizabeth Rebecca Herring Tut Smith, so 178, if I go to her, I do mention that her parents, in the very end section, I have like grave reflections, and I said that her parents are buried in Old St. Paul's. That's what I was looking for.
Okay.
Cemetery. And, Francis Scott Key was buried there originally, was reinterred, so not there now. But it was a cute little cemetery, and I've only been able to peep in outside of the gates.
Okay. Oh wow.
There's a chain link fence, as well as, a historic gate that would have kept me out anyway. But
okay.
I called several times, and like as a professor and a researcher, I usually do have pretty good access into places. And it wasn't that they were saying no, it was just, and it also, this is out of, a world, pandemic, and people are much more cautious about in person. But I had a hard time. And after a month, I was like, even if I get to go in to see this grave, I won't actually be able to recommend this for people because it would be such a challenge.
Yes, that makes sense.
But I will say that the marker is very close to the gate. So if you're like me, like you can peep in and take pictures and whatnot. But
yes.
It was important only because this was someone who was Poe's uncle, and he shows up throughout the book, so I don't think I excluded anyone altogether, like to help me tell the story, because as you've read it, I go through sort of a loose chronological order of the different people who were in Poe's life, and some people were there, like cousins and family from the beginning, so I just try to put them in at a significant time. But I didn't miss anyone in the area that I was covering, because the History Press does have a word count restriction, and my first dream was the entire East Coast, which
that would probably be over the limit there.
Oh, yes. I think it was one of the notes that I have is there were 240 some correspondence with Poe, just the nature of his job was he was writing people. So I got to read the letters, which were really amazing.
That would be.
Yeah, I mean, and so I had read the poetry and the stories, but I never really stopped to read the literary criticism, which is weird because literature professor, you would think, but so on this journey, I was able to read the letters, like, to and from Poe, the ones that were available, as well as, the criticism. And I just learned so much. Like, I had no idea how much I didn't know starting this.
Well, I was telling Jeannie that, reading, there were some people that, a lot of them, the usual suspects that with Poe, but there were a few other outside people that it's like, oh, I didn't know this. So I'm like, this was I enjoyed it at so much like entertainment value for me, but because I love Poe, I love cemeteries, but I was like, this is, historical and a learning experience too. And I love to learn. So it was awesome.
Yes, for me too. Awesome. For me too. One of them was, Dr. Carter, who was a friend of Poe's. And when you think of, Dr. Carter, you always think of like someone that's older, but he was a kid compared, he's like half Poe's age at the time that they met.
Yeah.
So I didn't quite understand like the age of this, and there's no fault, of anyone. I've gone to museums don't have the time to sit there and put everybody's age in and how they know each other, and but there were really fun, like the letters were so much fun because you got to see the the language of people who weren't necessarily, some of them were poets and didn't realize it. And some of them, were published poets, but their letters were just so beautiful and poignant. And
yeah, and just and the handwriting would be amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and the language in that time period was definitely centered still on the British influence, because they were, in kind of like crossing it to the new dialect and the new interpretations, but they were still getting that influence from the Latin base of the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, the English, the German, you got the Italians, you had all of Europe pretty much in the area that was influencing the language, but it was also influencing the educations is in those areas. Only those that were well off and male were getting the main education. So the younger doctors and all those, you weren't really, today it's like you're really that young to be a doctor? What the, back then it's like, they didn't have to go through 7 years of residency or, go to the ER and hang out or anything like that. But I wanted to also bring in that I loved how you formatted each one of them, because if you took out just each one of the people that you visited, it could be a story on its own.
Yes.
And especially, I loved how you used the quotes.
Yes, we love that.
We use quotes at the beginning and the end of our podcast. So we were like, oh, yeah. So one of the things I wanted to know is, how did you choose the specific quotes for each one of the people that you talked about? Was it just something that just came to you, or as you were researching it, it was like, oh, this would fit perfectly? So what was your reasoning behind that is what I'm asking.
Probably the same way you do a podcast, like what speaks to you. So obviously for me, the journey was not, I start at the people in the beginning of the book and then I go through, it was all over the place and I had no idea who was going to be in what order, some made sense. They would be near the beginning, but I really wanted to meet each person separately. Like I wanted to tell the story of Poe, but I also really wanted to know who these people were. And I'm always like, especially the women, like I'm always just curious about what were they like. But I really was so overwhelmed with some of the newspaper men and some of the writers that I had never even heard of. So that was exciting. But some of them just, when I was like researching and writing, I think everyone had like a little bit that was like, oh, that needs to go. Like, I need to include that. That just makes sense. Some there were more than one. So and then my husband is my first reader. He's MFA creative writing. So
nice.
Oh, that is nice.
Yeah, I just read I read his draft today. He's a fiction writer, so I think I bored him a little bit. But he does tell me how to, make things a little bit more enjoyable, so I don't read like, here, like, let me drone on about about history that I love, but you might not care. So
well, it was like I was telling Carmen that when I was reading it, I could see it very much from an academic nonfiction standpoint.
Yes.
It very much called to me in that area. But on the same instance, like I was saying, each one of them were telling a story. So that called to the storytelling parts of me.
Yeah.
But it was so funny. Carmen actually had to point out one thing to me. I don't know why I missed it or what about it, but Miss Valentine in there, her birthday was February the 14th of 1884, right? No, 1780.
No. Yeah.
1784. I'm like, no, let's go back. That's my birthday. My birthday is February 14th also. So I guess when I was reading it and I saw the last name of Valentine, I just glossed right over the dates. And
and I was like, her last name, her maiden name was Valentine, and she was born on Valentine's, which is just so coincidental, ironic, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And so I said something to Jeannie. She goes, I did not catch that, and I should have, being born on the same day.
It was just one of those things. I was like,
Mhm.
I just missed it.
So Frances Valentine Allen was a big deal for me. So this is Poe's foster mother,
Mhm.
who really, she did not birth any children her own. She really did love Poe as
Yeah.
her son. But she was such a big deal for me. Like, I've been doing tours at Shaco Hill Cemetery.
Mhm.
She's buried there. The Allens are buried there. I always make bad jokes about Baltimore, which has taught me a lesson a few times. But I always say, Shaco Hill Cemetery is, where Poe would have been if he didn't go to Baltimore. And then last year, January, I went to Baltimore and I fell on the cobblestone and broke my finger. And I was like, I left like a blood sacrifice in Baltimore. So this past time we were friends. Like,
Yes.
I love Baltimore. And in fact, I
Yeah.
think the folks in Baltimore might love Poe more than Richmonders. And those are some fighting words, but
Yeah. Oh,
I mean,
wow.
they really do. Like, you can
Mhm.
go anywhere in the city and there's restaurants and everything's so thematic, and I love thematic. So for
Mhm.
me, I'm just like nothing but love for Baltimore. So I need to
Yeah.
stop telling my bad joke. But I will say with Frances Allen, and this is a podcast, but I did put on some orris root because that's what
Yes. Yes.
Poe.
Yes. Yes.
I
Yes.
saw
I
that you
love
mentioned
it.
that in the
I love
book,
it.
that you made
Yes.
sure to have that on when you were
Mhm.
visiting her grave, so you could
I
sit there and get the same feeling as when Poe would bring those flowers to her, or the perfume. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He remembered her having that
Yeah.
in her room, like if she'd open her bureau drawers, he could smell that. And
Yeah.
well, one, I didn't know orris root was so expensive, so I really had to. I was like, whoa, why is this such a difficult product to find? But
Oh, wow.
I use a lot of the natural botanicals, so
Mhm.
you can find it. And I tried a couple, and they do smell similar. So I guess that's what orris root actually smells like. Um,
Okay. Okay.
so hopefully I'm, getting a similar smell, but there are moments like that where I really just try to connect with the person too. I wanted to, reading their letters, I just kind of think about what would it be like if someone just picked up my letters or my diary and read all this information about me. That's
Mhm.
what I did to these people. So I wanted to be very respectful. I was always very much like, thank you. I'm not a paranormal, supernatural like person at all, but I am very
Mhm.
gracious when I'm in a cemetery because you never know. And
Yeah.
I was raised right. So
Oh, yeah. I was gonna say my father passed when I was pretty young, and my mother regularly put flowers on my dad's grave, and I always went with her.
Yeah.
And she always would turn the music down in the car. We would drive very slow through there. We'd stand at the grave and just kind of silence for 5 minutes or so, and then we'd kind of just say, okay, we're going to leave now. And
yeah.
it was just it I will never forget those moments. And it's like, this is so bittersweet because I miss my father, but at the same time, I enjoyed going to the cemetery to kind of just pay that respect.
Right.
So, because kind of like you said, raised right and
Mhm.
treating cemeteries.
And I mean, with that too, we usually don't have very many connections to cemeteries unless it
Mhm.
is a funeral or visiting a loved one.
Yeah.
And so my husband and I, so I'll just keep it creepy, but we have our plot. That was one of
Okay.
our like I think the first year's paper. And
Oh,
it was his
yes.
idea.
Yes.
He's so not cemetery creepy or anything. But it was his idea. And I, of course, was like, oh, this is so amazing. So we got to ride around on this little, golf cart with the manager of the cemetery and pick
Mhm.
our spot,
Oh,
which
wow.
to me was like super amazing. And we found a spot that I probably shouldn't tell this part, but it was discounted because it's like on a hill with a bunch of trees. It would be a horrible place for a funeral, is what they said. But we're both
Okay.
introverts, and we sort of like the idea of being in a
Nothing wrong with that.
really popular place, but also quietly tucked under this beautiful magnolia
Yeah.
behind a mausoleum. And I was doing that Scooby-Doo sort of tiptoe trying to get to the spot.
Yes.
So, but we do go, and like annually, Hollywood Cemetery has an annual picnic, and
Mhm.
we, my husband goes for the free ice cream and the hot dogs, and and then I just make him like walk around the cemetery. But we visit our plot together. So the idea is for us to also have some sort of tangible connection to. I remember when I,
Yeah.
toured him around the cemetery that first time, and I remember when we picnicked here together. This
Mhm.
is where we're gonna our forever home. So
Yeah.
we're trying to make memories there too, which is probably just because I'm a cemetery historian. I don't think
Yeah.
that's normal. So.
Yeah. Well, and the I've done a lot of historical tours, and a lot of times you have to do a ghost tour, and you get that historical aspect, and that my husband likes that part of the ghost tours, and we've gone to several cemeteries and done that, especially down in New Orleans,
Oh yeah.
and it's amazing to me that more people really enjoy going to cemeteries than you would think.
Mhm.
I really do believe that. Yeah, and they're
Absolutely. And
beautiful. They're so
yeah,
beautiful.
and I'm all for the ghost tours because they, like, even with my class, it's a way to trick people into some history.
Yes, yes.
And for me, like, oftentimes when I'm on, one of those walking tours, whether it's a ghost tour or just a historic tour, there's always like a little bit of like, oh wait, that just piqued my interest, and now I'm gonna go look for some more information.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
It
yeah.
triggers your own type of want, like you're saying. It triggers your want to know more.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That's just like I'm like Carmen and you guys. I love doing ghost tours, especially if I go to the areas that I know that has a plethora of history,
Mhm.
being the Civil War and everything else like that. My favorite one that I've ever visited was in Savannah, Georgia.
Okay.
Ghost story. It was a ghost tour that took place just in this cemetery that was outside. It was on the outskirts of the
Mhm.
town. And there were so many weeping willows with Spanish moss hanging from it. And we did it like at dusk, and there was a storm coming in. And there was this one monument that was an archway type of
Was it
monument that was at
was
the
it congregational? Is that the one that's in the middle of the city? Or
end.
is it colonial? Like, I can't remember.
Colonial.
It
It's colonial.
colonial. Okay,
Yeah.
colonial cemetery.
Yeah.
I love that cemetery. So cute.
Yes. And it was so weird because we were walking down the middle and that archway was right there. That storm, a lightning strike came down and it got right in the middle of that archway. And it was just phenomenal.
Wow.
The timing and everything. This is the oh, what is the woman's name? Will Wilma, she was the runner. Oh,
Wilma Rudolph.
yes.
Mhm.
She's buried there.
Okay.
Oh, it
Okay.
may not be colonial, but this is the cemetery that she's buried in because there is a monument that is a bronze statue of her
Mhm.
on the gravesite. So,
Okay.
yes, and that was kind of what I was reading when I was reading your story about each one of these. I was kind of picturing it when I'd go on these tours and
Yeah.
walking through the grave. And it's kind of like getting part of history that you're being put back into that era and
Mhm.
you're following and you're trying to think, oh, how old was Poe when this person died? What was he feeling? What could have inspired some of his work by their deaths or who they were. So,
Mhm.
I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
it was very inspirational. That's what I
When
tried.
you're talking about like the magical moments too, like I was thinking about not only the letters but my own experience, because I have the grave reflection section
Wow.
where
I
and
love
I
that part. I love that part.
thank you. I mentioned Elizabeth Rebecca Herring Smith, and when I found her grave, so it Loudon Park Cemetery is ginormous. I mean, they've sort of, continued adding to it. And when
Mhm.
I pulled up, I had a video on Facebook because this horse-drawn hearse carriage was leaving like the cemetery, and I was like, what century am I in? And
Oh my gosh.
right at the same time, I was like, this is going to be an amazing visit. So I knew her section, but I didn't know exactly where she was, buried. And she was a little bit away from sort of like the congested family plots and down kind of on the side of a hill, and her grave marker was broken. So I had been, doing hunting in this little section. And when I found her marker, I kid you not, the church bells started playing Ave Maria.
Wow.
And I don't remember if I put that in the book, but
you did. I remember reading that. Yes, yes.
But I was just like, whoa, like I had to take a minute for that because I felt like I was helped. And, probably the raised Catholic girl in me, my dad always says, like, there's a little bit of magic out there. And so, but I do felt, sometimes I felt like I was helped in, when I was trying to find someone. And
that's very cool.
Yeah,
and
it really is.
Carmen, that researching that far back into history, even though it's only been 200 plus years, it's really difficult that I've found, especially in genealogy, because of the times, if they didn't keep correct records, or if they didn't spell the names correctly, or if they weren't connected correctly, it's like a bomb went off, a nightmare of trying to figure out who gets where. So when we were talking, I was like, I wonder how long it took her for this full process.
Yes.
I was going to ask you, from beginning to end, from research and everything, how long did it actually take you to get everything that you needed to make this happen?
Surprisingly not that long. So I will, just shout out to all the Poe houses and museums. They had a wealth of information. And so much of the people who were even included in the book, I was somewhat familiar with. I would say 75% of the people in the book, I was familiar with their names and maybe how they were connected to Poe, somewhat like a cousin or a fellow writer. But then it was, finding information. So it was just the Poe scholars before me that put so much of that together. I would not have been able to do hardly anything without the people from the past. So my dedication is to all those, not only my dad, who collected newspaper articles about Poe when I was a kid, but to those who have helped to tell the story of Edgar Allan Poe. Because without those people, I wouldn't have been able to. I mean, I just kind of had to spin, like the little twist of, let me go find this, the graves, not just I'll visit Poe's grave, but let me visit everybody's grave.
Yeah.
But that, and also the cemeteries themselves, like so many of them kept great records. Shockoe Hill Cemetery, I volunteered with them, so they were very open. But everyone that I really contacted, mind you, if they had the resources. So I'm not trying to say, like, if they didn't let me in the cemetery, I'm not, like, it's a small cemetery with a small staff. Like, I'm not trying to toss anybody under the bus, but everybody sort of wants to help you when you're writing a book and researching it. I had the idea probably right around the time, like, I have my first book that came out was during the pandemic and pretty much early on. So 2021, and it was Women Writers Buried in Virginia. And my idea was that, I was stuck at home, but I'm an introvert, so I'm okay with that. But I do like to go to my cemeteries. And, I was reading local women writers, and then I started traveling. I think I went to VC Andrews, first. She's in Portsmouth, Virginia. And then I was just like, oh, this is brilliant. I can take myself on a grand tour. So with the Poe book, I started like after, the Women Writers was published, I was thinking, all right, now how can I make this about me going all to the Poe places? In like Poe land, like I read those like books about, going to places, and then there's books about artifacts, and I just kind of was just like, but I want to go to the cemeteries. And that was, for me, that was a lot of fun. So I would say, a little over a year, maybe, which I
Okay.
think is pretty quick. But
Mhm.
I'm also a college professor, so 9 months, teaching, and then I'm out of contract. So for the summer, I can research, publish or perish, but really just it's so much fun to learn, like you said.
Oh yeah,
Yes, absolutely. That
definitely.
that that really is, I wondered the same thing, like how long it would take you to do all of that. So,
Yeah.
did you go back to the cemeteries? I'm sure, well, some you probably visited just because you were looking at different graves, at different times. But were there some that drew you in that you went back to more, like more and more and more?
I think there will be some that I'll go back to.
Hmm.
And so I feel like each time I tell the story, I talk about people who are a little bit different. And because I can't figure out a favorite, like who's the favorite person that you visited? I mean, like I said, Reverend Converse, going to Cave Hill was really magical. And I can't imagine not returning there. I met
Hmm.
some amazing people with their, history society, like outside of Louisville, and who were so gracious. Like there was a woman's tour that they weren't giving, and they sent me all of their notes,
Oh,
which I'm like,
wow.
who does that? Like, that's
That's
amazing. And I'm like,
amazing.
I don't like, can you publish this into a book? And they're just like, no,
Yeah.
I don't have time for that.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So it was a lot of, it was a lot of the personal connections too, like connecting with the people, connecting with the graves. And then I continually talk about PP Cook having the sexiest gravestone. And for me, that was one of my favorite. It's Burwell Cemetery, and it's in Millwood, Virginia. So it's the western part of the state. And I didn't know who Philip Pendleton Cook was. He was a poet the same time that Poe was a poet. They wrote for the Southern Literary Messenger, and I talk about, so you might be more familiar with him there. But he just wrote these beautiful letters that I could have read all day. And then also shout out to Hiram Haynes. So that's connected to Poe's wedding, like his honeymoon
Yes.
in in Petersburg. Like Hiram Haynes can also write a really sexy letter to his lady. So,
Wow.
Nice.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
but Cook's grave was so beautiful, and it's sort of the shape of it mimics the lyre, and
Mhm.
it was a really, really beautiful day. It was cool. So he's got this poem that's really known for fall weather, and I was like, it's okay, it's similar. But then I read it, and I was just having this moment, and I've shared with just a few people, but I did not put it in the book, that all of a sudden the wind blew, and this puff of, I have no idea, but I was so allergic to it, about
Wow.
right from the trees, like I could see it coming, almost like little dandelion seeds,
Uh-huh.
but I think I hacked in the cemetery for about 40 minutes, and
Oh.
it's out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's very rural, but it
Hmm.
wasn't like people were going to see me, and I was just like,
Right.
please don't let me cough to death. Like I had hoped to like have a nice little picnic and sit and reflect, and it was just so lovely. And it cracked me up too, because
Yeah.
I was having a moment with this author and just laughing, and what a good time to have, like,
Oh,
with
yeah.
so
Oh, I know. Did
Other than wanting to try not to choke to death and die.
Yeah,
I mean, you're in the
exactly.
right spot if you're in a cemetery, but you don't want that to happen.
Oh, yeah.
the spring allergens, man, like
Oh, yeah. Oh, don't even get us started. Down here in Tennessee, it's bad.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
a real problem.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say, talking about kind of unusual things, did you have any other like experiences that were unusual, or like like maybe being at a grave for, I don't know how long you spent like at each grave, probably depended on the time of day, weather, things like that. But did you have anybody like come up to you and talk to you? We were kind of interested in, because you just never know who
Yeah.
you're going to run into, and that kind of thing.
My first job was working at a theme park. So
Mhm.
I naturally have this, I see someone who looks lost and I'm going to help them.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm in local cemeteries, if someone looks lost, I'll come up and say, do you need a map? Because I usually have maps in my car, some of the larger places.
Yeah.
But I'm always trying to help people. But some people did ask questions. One Greenmount cemetery, there's two, Nelson Poe and John Pendleton Kennedy are buried there. And they also have Elijah Bond, who is, known for patenting like the Ouija board, what would become the Ouija board, the spirit board.
Mhm.
So I think it's the Spirit Board Society has put a
Okay.
grave marker there. So they're very cautious about people, taking pictures. And so I'm like looking, I'm like wandering around looking for, I think Kennedy's grave or someone else. And they were just like, are you looking for Bond, the Ouija board? I'm like, no, nothing that weird. Thank you. I've already seen
Not
that.
today. I haven't looked for him today. Sorry.
So I think there were moments like that. And then, people sometimes would ask, like, what am I doing?
Okay.
Like if I was there and, I'm taking a picture, then it's like, is this person famous because I'm taking a picture? And then I kind of have to explain, well, what do you mean by famous?
Right.
During their time, absolutely. Like, but I get really excited about, oh, this is how they're connected. I think it was Sims, William Gilmore Sims, Magnolia Cemetery, which really freaked me out because they have a sign that says, South Carolina law is you can't feed the alligators. I am terrified of, I don't know why. We don't, knock on wood, have alligators in Virginia, but something about that just really like scared me. But I was actually at a public park where Sims has a statue, and I was taking pictures of that, and people were asking, like, who is this guy? Like, it just has writer. And I was like, Edgar Allan Poe. He said that he was like the best writer like of the time. And they're like, oh. So there were moments like that, but I also did have a few people who were clearly really into the history and Poe fans. Like when I've been in Chaco Hill Cemetery doing anything like cleaning up or tending to flowers with the Friends of organization, then if anybody has a question about Poe, they're usually like, oh, Sharon's here and she does the tour and she's writing this book, and she will give you all the information that you probably don't even want to know about these people.
That's like when I meet some people and, somehow or another, sometimes it ends up, I have a podcast. And some people that don't know a lot about Poe have heard of him, read him in high school, middle school, or whatever. So tell me like all about Poe. And I'm like, do you have like 10 million years? It's like I could talk about him for days, and I don't even, and of course, Jeannie and I touched on so many things, and people ask us too, are you ever going to run out of topics to talk about? And we're like, no.
Yeah.
No. And people to talk to about Poe. I mean, it's like we'll never run out.
Yeah.
So Jeannie, we're locked into this for till death.
All right. Well, at least we know that Sharon can come find our gravestones and add us in her book.
That's right. Yes.
That's right.
Goodbye, Poe fanatics.
That's right. That would be a fun book too.
Yeah. It would. It definitely would. Oh my goodness.
Book 2, Poe fans that have gone off the deep end. There you go.
One of the hardest questions I get is always like, what's your favorite work? And I sort of do have a favorite one that I taught fairly often, but it's complicated because I think after this project, there's so many of the letters that I really enjoyed,
Mhm.
and learning about the other people and how they wrote and what they wrote. That was pretty magical. I'm thinking about near the end of the book, or no, not near the end. Where is he? So, childhood friend of Poe's, John Preston. I think that's who says it.
Okay.
No, I think I totally just spaced. I was thinking about oh, I'm sorry. So Robert Matthew Sully, who was a friend of Poe's growing up. And one of the things that I found out about him too was that after, Poe's death, he went on and, he was this big, like, historical, like, researcher. He was into preservation, and he traveled to Jamestown. So I really loved, like, how he depicted his description of seeing the ruins of Jamestown and seeing the cemetery. So much of, like, what I learned was not just like who knew Poe, but who helped make this person, who he was.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but all of these people they were just amazing people. And, even the foes that I have in there, I liked them too. So
Well, and it goes into the whole aspect of, every person that you may have met along the way has had some type of touch upon your life that you may not even know. And it's like I was talking to Carmen about, learning about these people you'd put in your books and all that. And I was like thinking, I wonder how many of them that actually spurned Poe's particular poem or story at that time, how many of them actually were influential to his writing, but nobody knows because he may not have put them in there or nobody. But as you said, every little person that we've come across, whether family, friends, or foes, have had some impact on our life. So, and that's one of the things about your book that was spurning my thoughts, going, I wonder if this person is what this poem might be about.
Yeah.
So,
and he changed the name to protect the innocent or guilty.
Yeah.
But I think
himself.
In so many of his poems too, like, scholars will fighting words about who it's actually written to or for. But I think it changed, and I think it's, he often wrote about the ideal woman for him, which, sometimes were the ladies on my shirt, like, Laura, Lygia, Berenice, Annabelle Lee, Morella. So but I don't think they were any one woman. So I like to think, Jeannie, what you said is, like, just as we're connecting to each other, how are we influencing, how are you influencing me now? How am I influencing you? People that listen to the podcast, how will they be influenced? What will they do next that, will keep passing on? And I think that's the really cool thing about the human connection. And it, it's easy to think, oh, cemeteries for dead people, like, okay, but no, there's so many stories. It's, just, it's an amazing place to go and learn about the people who are there, about the history of the place itself, the history of the stone carvers. There's so much there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even after they've gone from the mortal plane, so to say, they're still getting their influence into the living, even after death. And I think that's what a lot of people miss about the whole aspect of cemeteries. Whether it be the maintained, the big ones, whether it be government controlled, or the small family ones that don't have the written historical accuracy that's being kept up, or the tombstones that are being cared for. Even after that, when someone stumbles upon them, it's like, I wonder what happened. It's that thought process. And So that's one of the things that I loved most about your book, is
Yes.
because it made me have a walk through history, but at the same time walking with Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I hope people bring the book with them, and I hope that they go to these
Yes.
cemeteries and stand there and be like, wait, who are you again? Okay.
Mhm.
I did that myself. And, I'm not someone that really talks to myself very often. But I did, talk aloud, like processing information. I
Mhm.
wanted a connection in that place. And, for many of the people, it was their burial spot was closer to either where they had lived or grew up. And even there were places that Poe had walked himself. So sometimes when
Wow.
I'm walking through cemeteries and I'm like, I know Poe walked here, it's surreal that he was,
Yes.
not just a myth or a bobblehead, but this was a man who, lived and really tried to make a life from writing and being an editor. And now, I mean, this all goes back to the beginning when I talk about media literacy. The newspapers, they're losing funding because advertisements aren't there. We're relying on the internet for our news. What's happening to reporters? And not to be political or anything like that, but that was what Poe was fighting for.
Yeah.
To make a livable wage as a writer, as an editor, as a journalist.
Absolutely.
Well, it also goes back historically to how we ended up with the First Amendment of freedom of press. And it was from John Peter Zenger trial back before we actually became the United States. This happened in New York City, where he was, accused, and he wasn't even the reporter. He wasn't even the writer. He was just the guy that published the newspaper.
Yeah.
But he was put under the guise of being riotous, I guess, being inflammatory about the current governor of the time, because it was British controlled at the time.
Yeah.
But because of that trial and what happened, that's how we ended up getting freedom of press put into our constitutional Bill of Rights. And it was all about fighting for that ability to bring an objective side, let's just put it that way, bring an objective side of the truth so the populace could make their own, informed decision. And so with the loss of the newspapers and some of the other things, and just relying on just the social media of the time, I've had these conversations when I was actually still teaching. I taught American history 8th grade. So that was one of the main things.
Yep.
And it was very eye-opening to where getting people to understand that the news that way back when isn't equal to what we are facing now, because there's a whole different aspect of history.
Right.
Some of those people that are in those cemeteries, I know you brought up with Patrick Henry in one of your reflections, and I was like, yeah, give me liberty or give me death.
Yeah.
And then I was joking with Carmen because we both have, middle school. She was the principal of the middle school. I was a teacher. But that one that you said was size matters exclamation. I was like, oh my goodness, the middle school teacher in me, when I saw that, I went, oh Lord.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I taught
It's
sixth
true.
grade one year when I was
Okay.
I taught
did
high
too.
school.
Sixth
But
grade
one
was-
year I taught
yeah.
sixth grade, and I
Yeah.
had since I'm a deaf educator, I had a self-contained classroom of mostly boys.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
Oh, wow. Wow.
yeah.
So
We
when I knew that you
understand.
all were teachers, I was like, "Ooh,
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
I get it."
Yeah.
In middle
Yeah.
school was
Oh, I loved being an assistant principal in middle school. It was probably my favorite of being an administrator, but I love teaching high school. And I decided a couple years ago to go back in the classroom, and so I'm teaching freshman English now.
Aw.
And the only Poe aspect that's in our curriculum is Annabelle Lee, which
Mhm.
I've done several things with and love it. The kids love it. I've added a few extra things that you can kind of like that they break down figurative language and things. So, because I'm like, Poe's got to stay alive, but the kids still, even in 2023, they love him. They think he's creepy, but because he married his cousin, and so that's really the only creepy thing that they don't like. They love
Yeah.
everything else.
I mean, one, the Poes and the Clems did marry their cousins.
Yeah,
That
and a
was,
lot of people did back then.
yeah, and
Huh.
it wasn't that strange. I mean, it's so strange for us now to think
Yeah.
about the age difference. But
Mhm.
it was more normalized than,
Yeah.
which, like we could, from a 2023, 20, is
Yeah,
it,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, wait, I had to think about the
Yeah,
year.
I know.
Like it's
That's
hard
true.
to look at history from, that lens and make any sort of judgments, but
Yeah. Yeah, just the context. Yeah, it's like you always have to remember the context. Yeah.
right. But he, like one of the great quotes that I had in there was for White, who was the Southern literary messenger. Poe writes in this letter like, "Oh, I knew it was so gruesome and it was horrible, but I got to give people what they want."
That's right. That's exactly right.
So I
Oh, I
don't,
know.
we think about him as being this like dark, morose, fella, but he, was in the garden and,
Mhm.
seemed like he had a pretty happy disposition when he was in New
Yeah.
York and, when things were going well, and just,
And love
oh,
jokes and satire.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yes, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah,
There's a
we've
lot of
actually
facets to the man.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
we've actually discussed either with Poe Unplugged or on our podcast about how the aspects of his writing changed based on how he could have been affected both with the alcohol and with his health.
Mhm.
Because Dr. Poe, we went to one of his what's it called? Pints and
Profs and pints.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
He's a professor and also a descendant.
Mhm.
So he had talked about how they have speculated that he suffered from a brain tumor and he had other medical things later on in his life, and maybe that contributed some to his into the macabre, into the morose and the changing and stuff like that. And because his personality, we can see different aspects of it from different points. Because one of his favorite poems of mine is El Dorado.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I mean, I love just the way it's very small, but it's very succinct, and it talks about kind of like the gold at the end of the rainbow type of thing.
Yeah.
So, but yeah,
Absolutely.
it's great to have him still alive.
Yeah.
Whether it's through teaching or whether it's through his work or just these podcasts or whatever, or books, or
Mhm.
it's good because he does have that connection, and we need to keep that connection both for literary and for just historical purposes, in my opinion. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes. Well, Sharon, anything else you want to add?
I don't know. I hope that, I hope people will check out my book.
Yeah,
Again,
I say hold it up again, hold it up
Yeah.
again.
yeah,
and
Yeah,
let's plug it
definitely.
because it's coming out on August
Yes.
21st.
yes.
And is it going to be available on pretty much Amazon or any platform, or you can go through History
Okay.
Press, who is the
It-
publisher?
I would say like last time that I had like my first publication, if
Mhm.
you ordered through History Press, you got it faster. So Arcadia Publishing. Yeah, they have to send it to Amazon, and
Mhm.
I think that was, for people who
Until
bought
then.
it through, that it was just a little bit slower, but also,
Okay.
I think it's bookshop.org. You can pick your
Okay.
own local bookstore and you can pre-order it that way, which,
Oh,
helps
great.
our booksellers and, kind of just, and it doesn't have to be, one from my area. It can be one from your area, which is what I
Mhm.
like about that. So,
Oh, very
Oh,
cool. So
that's really cool.
yeah.
bookwhat.com,
Oh,
bookshop.
I'm going to pull that up so I do not. I think it's.
Yeah, because used to we could just go to Books a Million or Barnes and Noble
I
Yeah.
know. And now
or
it's
Borders. Is there even Borders
oh,
around?
It
I
it it
wrote my doctoral dissertation pretty much in Borders.
Oh,
oh wow.
They had
yeah.
chocolate coffee. It was amazing.
That
It
Oh
is-
is
wow.
bookshop.org.
okay.
And it right now it has the number of how much was raised for local bookstores. So
Awesome.
I encourage
Nice.
everyone to
Okay.
go to them, and you can pre-order the book.
All right, so that's good to know because we need to
right.
keep our
Yes.
local jobs and bookshops especially in order because libraries, yeah, I still miss going to the libraries, but bookstores, oh Lord, like you said, you lived in Borders for your dissertation. I lived in Books a Million through all my master's degree and
Mhm.
all because it was always going straight to the coffee.
Yep.
Straight to the Wi-Fi and just sitting and writing and just something about the smell of books. You just
Yes. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, yes.
that smell.
As an introvert, that's how we, make friends. We sit there and we
Mhm.
read a book, and there's people that walk past, and we're like, oh, I had some human contact today.
That's
Very
right.
Yay.
Even if they just said, "Hey, great book," and just kept on going.
Mhm.
Human
Absolutely.
interaction
Yes.
done for today. Check.
Yes.
But yes, thank you very much, Sharon. We enjoyed
Yes, Sharon, this has been
joining
Thanks so
us on
much.
awesome.
the podcast.
And just want to also share, definitely check out Poe Unplugged and go register. You can find the link on our website, www.6degreesofpoe.com, and register for the event because Sharon will be back with us. And we're reading The Premature Burial and having a great discussion. We thought that would be the perfect one to have Sharon read or
Oh,
talk about with us. So
I'm so freaked out about that I'm being cremated. I'm letting you know that.
Oh, okay.
Um,
wow.
and not from you, but from
Right.
Poe. Growing up, I absolutely was like, I will not be buried alive. So when you picked the story, I was like, oh, okay.
Oh yeah, just learning
That's
some of
great.
the history behind the Black Plague
Yeah.
kind of ruined it for me. The bells, being the bells ringing, and I'm going, you
Well,
really
ring around the
know where that
rosies when
came
you
from.
find out what that's all about. It's like,
Yeah.
you've ruined my childhood.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
our childhood was macabre, and
Mhm.
we didn't even know it. But
No,
yeah,
we didn't.
it
No.
works.
Innocence is bliss.
And so our Poe Unplugged is the last Tuesday of this month, which
Yes,
is
August 29th.
August 29th at 7 p.m. Central.
Central Standard Time. Yes.
So please come out, join us, and thank you, Sharon. And we
Yes.
truly enjoyed having you.
Yes.
Thank you
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And so for that, we are
Poe out.
out.